first off, thank you everyone for coming out. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited to have you at Magic Academy and really happy that you're coming to my talks. I'm grateful that you're eager to learn from me. Hopefully this is going to be a really fun hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'll be speaking on different talks later this week, so hopefully I'll see and get to know some of you throughout the entire week. And I'll be doing office hours on most of the days, so feel free to stop by the office hour, or feel free to come just interrupt me in the hallway or reach out to me whenever if you want to ask questions or get advice about your startups. There are a few things I love more than talking with excited entrepreneurs about the ideas they're passionate about. Here's roughly what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to give you a little overview of what I'm all about. I'll talk a bit about lean startup, the lean startup methodology and lean canvas for those of you who aren't familiar. But once giving that an overview, we'll jump right into different types of business models and how they play out on the canvas and what things you want to de-risk and focus on most when you're thinking about different business models. And then we'll also talk about specific revenue streams tactically once you think you have some product market fit or you're really doing a good job of solving a specific customer problem, how you can monetize. Before I actually jump into the about me, I want to know a little bit about all of you. Quick show of hands. Actually, even before I do that, quick disclaimer. So I talk really quickly. If I'm talking too quickly, somebody get up and call me out on it, and I will slow down and articulate more. So please interrupt. Also, I tend to use lots of jargon and Silicon Valley terminology that may or may not have percolated throughout more than a few square blocks around my apartment. So if I say something that's really technical or weird and you don't know it, odds are you're not the only one, that most people are totally baffled by what I'm saying. So please, again, ask me, what do I mean when I say whatever, and I'm happy to explain. I'm sure you're not the only one. Okay, cool. So quick show of hands. Who is currently working on a startup that they founded? Yeah. Okay, cool. So looks like most of you. And then of you, how many already have funding? How many of you have already launched? How many have a product that's already out there? Okay, excellent. Great show of hands. And of those of you who have launched, how many feel that you already have product market fit versus are still exploring, stumbling around? So who has product market fit already? Okay, a smaller show of hands. So I think this is probably the right audience then for this talk. Excellent. I'm really excited. So first, a little bit about me. So as I introduced, my name is Randy Lubin. I am based in the Bay Area. I'm in the startup world, and I'm currently between different startups, so I'm running around advising other startups and giving talks as I work on my ideas for the next thing. I moved out to the Bay Area back in 2009 for grad school. I went to the Stanford Graduate School of Business, or GSB. I did a 2-year MBA program there. While I was there, I tried to work with a few different startups every semester just to advise them or do consulting. I found that immensely valuable as a learning experience and really fun. That's what really turned me on to how awesome the startup roller coaster is, how much of a blast it can be to just be building something with other people who are really passionate about solving problems. Also during that time, I taught myself to code and was putting out lots of little projects and tinkering on my own startup ideas. After graduating, I continued learning to code. I continued working on my own projects and continued consulting. Ultimately, I ended up joining one of my consulting clients, a company called Meetings.io. Has anyone here used Meetings.io? We didn't have too much global expansion, so maybe a couple hands. So we real-time video chat. Idea was to be as simple as possible. So it was all browser-based. You never need to download anything. There's no plugin. You don't even need to sign up. You just go to the website, click a button, and then you're face-to-face with whomever you want to chat with. So our idea was to be as simple as possible. So worked with the founder. So I didn't found it. Was close to the two founders. I had done a few consulting gigs for them on their previous ideas, and then they brought me on to help figure out what Meetings.io should be, and in general, where in the space should it be, what features should it have, what should the roadmap be, and then I worked to help them get the first version out the door. They then asked me to join full-time, so I joined as their COO, Chief Operating Officer, which in practice meant I was the business generalist. I was doing everything except for code. The two co-founders, awesome guys by the name of Dennis and Arnd, guys from Australia, who went through Y Combinator. And so they're very technical, so they were very focused on coding and building the app and making sure all the video components were working. And so I got to play the business role and do everything from working with investors and lawyers to the marketing and PR, trying to get some growth, to a lot of the product management, product strategy, and roadmap ideas. Ultimately, we ended up selling Meetings.io to Jive Software. And Jive is a very large public company in the United States that builds collaboration tools for other very large public companies. And they were interested in bringing us on to add more real-time communications. So I negotiated that acquisition and stuck around Jive for a little while, first doing product management for my old team, and then in corporate development, doing acquisitions, partnerships, and long-term strategy for Jive. About a year ago, I got restless, missed the startup life, and so I left Jive, and since then have been hacking on lots of side projects, advising other startups, and as I said, iterating on some of my own ideas. And so that's sort of been my journey at a high level, and I'm happy to talk about any other parts of that during Q&A later or just out and around over the next few days. So business models. So the first half is going to be more focused on business models, and then we're going to go into revenue models. And when we're talking about business models, first I'll talk a little bit about why they matter in general. I'll talk about the Lean Canvas and other bits of Lean Startup. But that's the other bit I wanted to ask. So who here has read the Lean Startup or is very familiar with Lean Startup methodology? Okay, about half of you. And then, and who's here is familiar specifically with the Lean Canvas or the business model canvas? So a few small hands. So I'll go a little bit deeper on that, but I'll send out, I think I have a link included in this presentation, otherwise I'll send it out later. There's a really good document online that goes through it in depth, so I don't want to take up your time now going over something that's already been really well captured in writing, so I'll keep that a little bit a higher level. That's fine, okay, cool. And then I'll talk about different common business models. Why we even talk about business models in general, I think it's useful to talk about in the higher level discussion around risk. So launching a startup, jumping into startups is one of like the riskiest things you can do in general, especially when there are all sorts of safe paths out there doing normal, boring, full-time jobs. And I've always found that if you have an appetite for risk, if you have an appetite for ambiguity, startups are like one of the best things you can do. It's just so much fun. Every day is a new adventure. You're constantly learning and experimenting, and you get to be really close to your users and clearly solving problems. And that's why I love startups. But when it comes to risk, and I'm totally okay working in an environment where there is risk and lots of ambiguity, but one of your roles as a founder or someone who's working at a startup is to take the risk that's there, even though you're comfortable with it, and constantly work at mitigating that risk, at bounding that risk, at figuring out, okay, yes, things are really risky, but how do we make them less risky or make it so that no matter how things play out, there's going to be something favorable. And so I think business models are really, really useful tools at, one, identifying where does the risk lie, and two, coming up with strategies and hypotheses around how do you bound that risk. So there's this, so again, to summarize, there's this really interesting paradox where startups are really risky in general, but you're going to be spending almost all of your time making it less risky. So in terms of why models matter, I think especially when we're talking about business models like the Lean Canvas, although you don't need to, in practice, use the Lean Canvas yourself. Some people love it. Other people like just long documents or other forms or slide decks. The key is having some sort of model, and there's a really good quote that I'm probably going to mess up right now that was by a famous general who said that he finds that having plans in general are totally useless, but that the process of planning is invaluable. And indeed, it's because as you're going through, in order to build any kind of good plan, you have to so thoroughly understand the context you're working in, the environment you're working on, and all the risks that you're working in. So again, having an actual plan that everyone, having the plan out there is nice, but the act of planning and really digging in is what matters most. But in general, having the model has lots of great benefits. So one, it's really good at communicating a shared vision among your team so that everyone knows you're on the same page, so that it's not like engineering is going off in one direction and design in another, and then salespeople are starting to sell something that doesn't exist. Having the model there in the first place allows everyone to say, oh, okay, I know where we are today, and even if the plan is going to be changing a lot, we at least have shared assumptions, and we're not spending our time working in different directions. So that's one really good benefit. It's just really good for helping to articulate your thoughts. I know I've seen plenty of times, both with myself and with startups, where you think you have a really good idea about what the strategy is going to be, how you're going to grow, and then when it actually comes to writing it down, you realize, oh, there are all these things I didn't consider, or there are things that are maybe a little bit at odds with each other, even within the model itself. So just the act of forcing yourself to go down and write down the model, whether it's in the business model canvas or in a document or slides or whatever, also really, really useful. And other things that's really great for are making sure that there are hypotheses for you to test. And so again, as you're going through your startup and at pretty much at any stage of the startup, you always want to have that list of like, we're operating in a new environment with lots of unknowns, but let's come up with some really good hypotheses, and then you can go through and actually start testing those hypotheses, rather than just saying, let's put great stuff out there and see what happens, because ultimately you want to be moving as fast as possible, but as fast as possible de-risking certain questions. And so it's really easy to be really busy in a startup and do lots of different things, but not have it be focused, and then you can just be staying in the same place with lots of activity. So really good for getting your hypotheses out there. Also really good for making sure that there's at least one route to success. Very often, companies will say, oh, we're just going to get a lot of users, and then we'll figure it out later. And I find that to be really dangerous, because unless you have at least one model to success, again, you can kind of justify any actions, any product roadmap, any potential partnerships. So saying, okay, we don't know what it's going to be. We think there are maybe these 10 different possible revenue models, or 10 different possible paths for growing our user base. The fact that you have one clearly identified is saying we think this is going to be the best, and it's probably not going to play out the way that we currently think it is, because we're going to learn on the fly. But like, there's at least one model is really useful. And again, it's good for focus. It's good for motivation. And finally, having models are awesome for making trade-offs. So constantly in startups, you're saying, okay, do we spend the next 2 weeks building feature X or feature Y, or do we spend a bunch of our time going at these channels to reach users or these other channels? And when you have everything captured in Canvas, all of your hypotheses, you can start saying, okay, it looks like most of our exposure right now is we don't know how we're going to get, what channel we're going to use to get our customers. So actually, let's spend our time focusing there. Or at another time it might be, it looks like most of our risk is coming from a place where we don't actually know if we can build this feature. It might just be too hard or too expensive. And so let's spend our time there. So again, as you're making trade-offs in how you spend money and how you spend time, having everything up there in the model allows you to say, where do I get the most impact from the amount of energy and effort I put out there. So that's my bit on why models are important and why models matter. So this is going to be an introduction to the Lean Canvas. The idea is it's one document that is going to capture all of the very high-level points about your business and how you're going to succeed. It's broken into these, nine different buckets. And the idea is that you only have like a sentence or two sort of in each. You put everything up here in one session, and that you understand that almost everything up here is going to be a hypothesis that's subject to change, and that as you keep learning, you keep updating it. And again, so this is a really nice canvas. It's a really good way of making sure you're covering all your bases. It's definitely geared more toward to modern startups that are just moving really fast and doing lots of experimentation and probably have low costs and a small team. As you start growing bigger, you probably need more robust modeling. But I think this is perfect for early on, where you're just building something and putting it out there and seeing, is this something that resonates? And so I'll give you a quick walkthrough of the different buckets. Again, I highly, highly recommend going online and reading the full document that really breaks out and gives lots of great examples about what goes in each one. Yeah. What's up? Sure. The request was to speak slower. I'm happy to speak slower. And please, if I start speaking fast again, because it's probably clear at this point, I love startups, and I love talking about startups, and then I start talking really fast because I get excited. If I start talking fast again, call me out on it. Somebody wave your hand, and I will slow down. Okay, I'll give a quick walk through the canvas, and let me see which slides. Actually, I'm going to give the walk as I start going and talking about it, which phase, which buckets make most sense. But let me just give, some of them fall into talking about the customers, so what problems do the customers have, and how can you organize the customers into customer segments. This isn't great because I guess everyone can't see one of the projections or the other. Oh well, so you have problems, customer segments that go together really well. Solutions are possible different solutions to those problems, and one thing I found that is really useful is keep going back to the problems and be very problem-centric rather than solution-centric, and that'll make sure that you're actually building something that people love and understand. Because when you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're not building something that's solving your own problem, but you're solving something that you haven't experienced yourself, but you know other people feel, it's easy to fall in love with your solution and to tell yourself a story of like, this is the best solution because it has all these amazing features, and then you've forgotten that the actual problems are more subtle or more different. And so really understanding and starting with problems are excellent. And I recommend checking out some of the great design classes that are going on this week and elsewhere about how to make sure you really understand the problem, how to get the most out of interacting with the customers to learn those problems. Other things I'll call out just right now. and in terms that might not be completely obvious. So I mean, down here is the more traditional business planning, understand your cost structures, understand your revenue streams. That becomes really important, again, in understanding and making sure that there is a possible future out there in which your company is a big, sustainable business that is making sense, even if in the very beginning that seems really far away, and that your plan might involve operating at a loss for years maybe. You still need to have a good sense of, oh, there is this opportunity for a stable state where I have revenues that are coming in that are way more than my costs. So it's good to go through that at first, early on. Channels in this case mean ways of getting customers. So it could be tapping online communities that are going to love this product. It could be having a really robust sales force. It could be going through partnerships and working with partners who have access to lots of customers. So that's, again, about knowing how you're going to reach your customers. There's another common mistake that startups make, another common fallacy, that is, if you build it, people will just come. Like, I'm going to put something amazing out there, and then users are going to show up overnight. That never happens, almost ever. You're talking too fast? Okay, I'll slow down. Thank you. So always having a plan about how you're going to get the users, how you're going to bring them in, is important. And then other things, so key metrics, I won't talk about too much right now. Key metrics are about how you're going to be succeeding, and especially once you start having product market fit, it becomes what's most important. Is it having users that are coming back every day? Is it having users that only visit every once in a while but are spending a lot of money when they're there? Things of that nature. And that's going to be different from one business to another. Let's see. Unique value proposition is about how you're different than everyone else out there. And it's usually a pithy summary of like why customers are going to need and love this product or service. An unfair advantage is also a little bit nebulous. It might take some time to figure out. It's not necessarily something you need from the very beginning, but that's about once you've started to succeed, once the word is out, how do you continue to be the best company out there, the most successful company out there, when there are tons of other companies that'll see what you're doing and try and copy it quickly? And so answers to that question can sometimes be, oh, well, I know those customers better than anyone else out there, and we're gonna continue to know those customers better than anyone else, because as we start going, we're gonna have the best feedback loops to really understand what motivates these customers and how their problems play out. And so that does a good job, I think, of covering the high-level buckets. Is there anything right now that is totally unclear, totally baffling? Anything that I've said that you just totally lost? Please tell me now.
Can you elaborate on the key metrics? Is it going to measure all the other components?
Sure. So the question is, can I elaborate on key metrics? So key metrics in this case are going to be somewhere between 1 and maybe 3 statistics that you check back on very periodically. So maybe every week, maybe on a little longer time scale, or maybe you have it on a screen in your office that's being updated every hour. And again, depending on your business, it might be different, but this is how you know you're succeeding. So there's definitely an art to picking the right key metric.
Can you give an example,
Sure. So at Meetings.io, I'll give examples from Meetings.io. Meetings.io is in a bit of a weird example because we didn't have any revenue when we started, and we weren't actually trying to get revenue, which is, in general, a bad idea. To do it over again, we might have wanted to go for revenue. At another point, I'm happy to explain why we chose not to. Is because we didn't want to be the best video platform out there. We wanted to get a really high-quality video product that we can monetize in other ways later on. But for us, we were really excited about most number of concurrent users, most number of users who are on the page at the same time, because we knew that was a test of our technology. So that was one metric that we tracked closely to help de-risk our technology. Another was daily active users, because we wanted to build something that people were really using regularly. So I'll give more examples of key metrics as we're going through different types of business models, because it's very, very varied. Question over there.
One is actually very specific metrics, and the other perhaps are very holistic metrics. So I think it's unfair to ask in terms of the specific metrics, because everyone would have specific and individual ideas about that. But perhaps what you can actually help me in is what are the basic or perhaps more focused holistic metrics that we can actually venture in before going into the specifics?
Sure. So the question was breaking down key metrics between specific metrics that are very very idiosyncratic to your given startup versus holistic metrics that are sort of true for all startups. And I'd actually say the metrics that you really care about are going to shift a lot, even within one company, over the lifespan of that company. And that early on, the metrics might be more around daily user engagement. For example, if you're building a, let's say it's a consumer app that you want your consumers to be using every day, then the most important figure might be, what are the engagement ratings? Is it, what's the average number of times a month that a user signs in? But then as you start growing, and you know that you have product market fit, I keep saying product market fit, by the way. Does everyone understand product market fit? Show of hands. No, oh, okay. This is a perfect example. If I say something that is lost, please raise your hand, because probably lost on many other people too. Product market fit is a term often used in Silicon Valley when talking about, do you know that what you've built is something that there's a customer base that loves it? And that, so early on, you're building products, you're putting them out there. People might be using it a little bit, but maybe they're not coming back, or maybe they're not using it in the way that you had hoped or highly engaged. And so you can have a product out there, but until people are loving it and using it and clamoring for more and telling their friends, you probably don't have product market fit. So early on, the first thing you're trying to do is race to product market fit. It's trying to iterate to work on as many versions of the product as possible until you know you've built something amazing that people love, that people will pay for or use or tell their friends, as the case may be. So, so product market fit is that point where you're done with the early experimentation in terms of figuring out what product you want to have, and it's more about how do you start scaling the business. And that's probably a good segue right now to talking product market fit. So product market fit as it relates to the canvas. So this is, again, very early on. Some of the biggest hypotheses are around what are the problems the customer's facing, and those are definitely hypotheses. You're gonna come in saying, I think this is the customers have a problem, the problem is X, and it could turn out to be something completely different, or that the problem that the customer first starts talking about is just a symptom of something much deeper. And so through tons of interviews, like the number one thing when people come to me for advice very early on is they'll come to me and say, hey Randy, is this a good idea? And I'll say, I am not your target customer, I don't understand that market. How many customers have you talked to? Have you talked to 40? Have you talked to 60, 80 different customers? Because that's how you know that you really understand the problem in general. Likewise on the solutions, so once you start hearing and understanding the problems, you want to start presenting solutions back to them. And then you'll start, they'll either say, oh, that's interesting, but I don't think I would ever use it because of X or Y or Z. And that cycle of saying, oh, is this an interesting possible solution, is a good way of figuring out if the problem that they say they have is the problem they actually have. Because it could be that they say, oh, I have problem X, and you say, oh, well, great, I have solution Y for that problem, and they say, oh, actually, I'm not interested in buying it. It could be that they don't actually have problem X, they really have problem whatever. Other things up here, as you're trying to figure out product market fit, are customer segments are really important. So understanding that there aren't one giant pool of customers out there, that the customers are usually incredibly diverse and have very different needs. Another common mistake startups make is trying to make something for a really big market, saying, oh, I'm building something that all people that are in there, like from between 21 and 30 years old, are all going to love this. Or I'm building something for women in their 30s and that's it. Or I'm building something for all companies that have 50 to 1,000 employees. And that is such a big trap to fall into, because if you try and build something for such a large user base, there's a good chance that they all have different feature requirements, and if you try and build something with all the features, then it might be too confusing for the customer to immediately get the value, or it might take way too long to build if you're trying to build for everyone, and it's harder to market to everyone. And when you're trying to market to everyone, you're competing against a lot of other companies that are trying to reach everyone, whereas if you build a very focused product for a very small customer segment to start, then you have a much more likely chance of building something that they love, of getting the product market fit early on, and then you can expand. Then you can start adding features or creating different versions of the product for adjacent customer segments. So again, early on when you're just starting out, these are the areas that I think are really important to focus on. And again, the whole idea is that you're not putting down your immediate answers, you're putting down guesses, you're putting down hypotheses. And by putting your hypotheses on here, you and your team will say, okay, here's what we think the right customer segments are, or even better, here's what we think the customer segments even exist. Because it could be that you think there's one group that's very uniform, very similar, and as soon as you start interviewing people, you see, oh, actually these are 2 different groups or 3 different groups. And so the idea, again, you put your guesses down, And then you go out and ask lots of questions, do lots of interviews, and you start seeing, okay, are these hypotheses right? If so, then maybe you circle them. I know teams that'll write the hypotheses that turn out true in one color, and then if the ones that are still up in the air in other colors, and they kind of cross them out and replace them as they learn. So it's about product market fit. Sustainability, so I think, so if the first stage of company is the product market fit, and then as you're starting to grow, sustainability becomes more important. Can you build a venture that is really working over the longer term? And so here what becomes really important is the unfair advantage. And so this is, again, it's like, why are you going to succeed when 10 companies rush in that have $1 million in funding and are all trying to do the same thing? Or what happens when Google steps in and tries to do the same thing? This is where you say, that's okay. They're going to try it, but they're going to fail because we already, this is where sometimes you see things like network effects, that, users want to, so raise a show of hands real quick. When I say network effects, do you know what I mean? Okay, network effects, quick primer. So the idea behind network effects are there's value, in some markets, in some products, the value is directly related to how many customers are already on the platform. So specifically the value for any additional user. For example, if I were to sign on to Facebook as the first user ever, there isn't any value there because I don't have any friends on the network, I don't have any reason to be there. But every additional user makes it more and more valuable. So when you're a startup, network effects can be a really powerful unfair advantage. If you're able to get tons of users up front, then everyone wants to be where you are. And so it doesn't matter if I launch something that's just like Facebook or even slightly better than Facebook today. Let's say I even launch something that's 3 times better than Facebook. It would be really hard to get started because I have to suddenly convince people to come onto a new platform where there aren't any users. So that's an example of an unfair advantage. Network effects don't exist everywhere, especially if it's easy to take your data and quickly just move it somewhere else, or if there's some way of getting value just by yourself, then network effects don't matter as much. But that's a really good example. Another unfair example, if you can get any kind of monopoly going on, if you can get any kind of exclusive access to one user base, that's really great, because a competitor can come in and try and get the users, but you already have them locked down. Sometimes that's in terms of contracts, just long-term contracts with the user or with some channel partner you're using to get to the user. So the unfair advantage is really important when you're creating a sustainable business. The other bit, which might be intuitive to many of you, is just making sure the costs and revenues really make sense. And again, even though this is important much later in the life cycle of a company, you want to go and put the hypotheses down when you're just starting out. Because if there isn't at least one clear path or a few clear paths to sustainability, then you're going to be in trouble later on. I'll give you one example. I was working with a friend of mine who had a text-based choose-your-own-adventure game that he was working on. And he had modeled out a lot about the product, a lot about the solution, what was going to make it unique. He had not modeled out the cost or revenue at all. And this was a few years ago, back when it was going to be all SMS-based rather than an app. And so I sat down with him and built a financial model, very easy model, just to look at, okay, how much do we think each text message is going to cost? How many text messages do we think are going to be in one game? And how much money can we make from one game? And we did the math, and it looked like the text message costs were way too high. That even if there were 1 million users, he would still be losing losing money for every user. So that's where doing a little bit of work up front and seeing, does it make sense? Are we going to get better revenues than costs, at least on a per user basis, becomes very, very important and very valuable. Finally, the other area of focus that I'll call is just growth. So again, when you have product market fit already and you know that you have a sustainable business model in general, key metrics and channels are really, really important for the growth. So channels become important when you're talking about growth hacking, when you're talking about doing lots of experiments to see how can you get all the users coming in, and having a good sense of what your cost per user is, and is that cost per user more money than the money that you're going to make for each user? Because if you have a very repeatable way of getting users, and that costs you less than how much revenue you're going to get in the short run, then you just want to put as much energy behind that as possible and just amp that up, because that's how you can start growing and scaling very quickly. The other area to focus on when you're talking about growth is key metrics, which we already talked about a bit earlier. So I'm going to move on now. So I'll talk about a few concepts right now from the Lean Startup. And the Lean Startup was originally a book by Eric Ries. It became a whole school of thought, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. So one of the key things, and this is one of the key components of the Lean Startup, is that there's this giant feedback loop, and that as a startup, you want to be ripping through this feedback loop as fast as possible. And so it starts off with your idea. Once you have an idea, you go out and you build it, and you want to build that usually really fast in a very scrappy way. And building an idea might not actually mean committing any lines of code. It might mean just creating a landing page for it, or just creating some mock-ups just with pen and paper or with PowerPoint and taking it to users. And that could be the most lightweight way of building something. Or even just going in without having built anything at all, but meeting with customers and pitching them. That's sort of a proxy for having built it. Once you build it, you end up with a product of some sort, and it could be, as I said, an actual product, or it can be a sort of fake product. Then measuring your results, and so this comes back to some of the key metrics. But measuring could be engagement. It could be what percentage of people who go to the product's landing page end up deciding to buy. There's been a lot of companies that have tried to figure out is this solving a problem or is it a real interest by creating a sort of a fake product that looks like it has some functionality, but as soon as you click buy, there's a pop-up that appears that says, hey, we're not quite ready yet, but please sign up for our mailing list. And then they know that's like a really, really good signal for if they built something people like, is if they're clicking on the buy link. And so that's a great way of saying, is this a good product that's going to make money without having to spend weeks or months actually building it. I'll give you one specific example right now of how we use that at Meetings.io. So with Meetings.io, we were building a video chat tool. We knew there were lots of features we can add, from screen sharing to being able to call in on the phone, to being able to scale up to tons and tons of users. When we launched, you can only have a call with 5 users. And so what we did is we created the main video chat screen with lots of these buttons around the edges. So buttons like screen share, buttons like call in. And these buttons did not work. And so if you were in a video chat and you click screen share, it would pop up and say, hey, thank you for your interest. We haven't built this feature yet, but we'll notify you when we do. And this was great, because it meant that we could launch way faster. Because every week you wait to launch is a week that you're missing out on feedback, and possibly missing out on feedback that you're building the wrong thing. So the most important, most valuable thing as a startup is just to be constantly getting feedback and moving quickly, because one of the most important things to allow you to grow as a startup are how much time you have and how much cash you have left, which are usually like very closely related. So a week spent working on a feature that customers don't want is a huge, huge loss. So when we went and built these buttons, these fake buttons, it was excellent, because we had counters that were keeping track of how many times people clicked them. And it turned out that lots of people were clicking on screen share, and nobody was clicking on call in. And it was great. So it meant that the next month we built screen share, and we launched it, and we got lots of press and lots of users, and we didn't waste any time at all building the call in feature. So anyway, that's the measure part of the loop. Ideally, you're measuring in a way that's really quantifiable. So maybe you're measuring something along the lines of how many users that hit the home screen end up trying to buy or pay. And if that's what you're measuring, then you're collecting all the data in one place. You're looking through the data, you're learning from the data. The data might cause you to schedule a lot of meetings with customers and say, hey, I noticed that you spent 10 minutes on our site and you didn't end up buying. Can you explain to me your thought process or why you didn't buy? Or, hey, I noticed that you clicked buy, but then you didn't actually enter your credit card. Understanding that is really important. So converting the basic data that you're throwing off into bigger learning, and then having that go back into the loop where you're coming up with ideas and coming up with the next thing that you're going to build. So the idea, again, is in the early days especially, just going through this loop as fast as possible. And this loop is actually really great, not just for startups, and not for startups and general business plans, but for anything. You can really, whenever you're trying to build something interesting or acting or doing something in any environment where there's lots of uncertainty, lots of ambiguity, you think about this loop as a way of framing how you want to quickly learn and build. So this is another phrase that comes up often in lean startups, which is get out of the room. Steve Blank is the guy who says this a lot. And the idea is you can spend as much time as you want sitting in your room brainstorming the best idea or talking with your co-founders and saying, oh, this product would be the best, or what if we have this extra feature here or there. But until you actually start talking to users, you have no idea if these are practical or realistic. And so he says, just get out of the room, go meet with your users wherever they may be. I was teaching a startup bootcamp in New Delhi earlier this summer, and for the first week, I had a bunch of kids coming to me and asking, so I think my favorite in terms of like why are they asking me and you should get out of the room, they were going to create a hardware wearable, a device for women and children who were nervous about walking around the city, that they might be harassed or come under threat, and that they hit a button that will notify the police or their friends. And so they came and they asked me, and I said, I'm not a middle-aged Indian woman or a child. I have no idea if this is a good idea. And these were young, they were all about your age-ish, they were college students, and I said, you're not exactly the users either. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to the nearby metro station and just start interviewing people who are waiting for the train. And then go next door to the grocery store and start interviewing people in the grocery store and see if this is something that they actually want and need. And they went out, and sure enough, they got lots of great feedback. And they found out, yes, this is something people want, but maybe some of the features are different than the features they first asked for. So again, the idea is get out of the room that just sitting in your room brainstorming is not going to take you very far and can lead you into trouble if you start building something that you think people want without actually validating that it's something people want. All right, cool. Next part, I guess before we move on to the next section talking about specific types of business models, any questions?
Just a quick question on the demand, the technique. Do you have any useful techniques for validating the intensity of the demand? Because, for example, if you ask people, let's say you do a test, right? You do interview around your area and people, let's say you do a test and you interview the people around and they say, yes, we want it. But are there any methods to verify that, this is beyond just this group and will it last for, say, the next few months?
Sure. So the question is, how do you know that demand is real and that when you're asking customers, they're actually telling you the truth? And it's a huge risk, especially if, so some of the earliest people you ask are probably people in your network, your friends or your friends of friends, and they really want to help and really want to make you successful, and that might bias them to saying, oh yeah, this is awesome, I would totally buy it, even when that might not be true. And so coming up with ways of making sure you have honest feedback is really hard. Some of the tricks that are available out there, the best trick of all is get people to pay. So if let's say you're designing something to be used by small and medium businesses, and you're going around and you're interviewing these small and medium businesses, and they're saying, oh yeah, this seems like a good idea, come back to me when you have the product. Maybe what you want to do is say, I'm willing to give you like a 30% or 50% discount right now if you sign today, and sort of hand them a contract and say, you just said this was a great idea, are you willing to buy? And then if there's this huge drop off in the people that said, oh, this is great, I would love to buy it, and don't buy it, then maybe they're lying to you, or at least they're confused. So that having contracts, actually getting people to pay is probably the best signal. Barring that, especially if you're dealing with companies, getting them to sign a form that's just non-binding, that doesn't really mean anything, but says, oh, I'm interested in pursuing a business relationship in the future. Like, again, doesn't actually mean anything legally, but if they're willing to sign that, again, that's like a nice sign. That's also something nice that you can go and take to investors. You can say, hey, look, I have 40, not contracts, but like 40 letters signed by potential customers that all say they would love to see this if we can build it. So those are some good things.
It's about the product market fit. Do you start, on a software house, so do you start, this is about the product market fit. Do you start building, is it quite common to start building a product, the software, and then try to interview the market and let them test it, and then another iteration, the agile way, is it advisable, is it common?
So the question is around how common is it to actually build the product first and then start taking it to customers? And I've seen the whole array from not even building anything and just pitching ideas to lots of customers, all the way up to building some really nice looking glossy app and throwing it out there. And I think the two key factors to consider about, so let me go back a few slides, about what's the size of this loop and how fast you're going through this loop. Some of the key factors are how long will it take me to build, and how nice does it have to be in order to get good feedback. And so the how long depends a lot on your team. And so this is one of those things. So quick show of hands, who here can code? At least a little bit. So I'm not seeing that many hands. All of you, if you're interested in tech startups, learn to code at least a little bit. You don't have to be amazing, but it's okay, I'm going to go on a little bit of a spiel, and I'll try not to speed up too much because I get really excited about this. Coding is amazing. It's like, if you like art, if you like creativity, it's the best paintbrush ever. Just to be able to create anything you can dream just through typing at your keyboard, not for that long, it's a pleasure. It's a pure joy. Beyond that, if you're doing your own startup, learning to code allows you to quickly create prototypes if you don't have a technical co-founder. Very valuable. It allows you to signal to potential co-founders that you understand where they're at. It allows you to empathize with what it's like to be an engineer. Also very valuable. And it allows you to have better conversations with engineers because you start understanding the buzzwords and the lingo and the jargon a lot better. And moreover, and this is something I found at Meetings.io, so I used to not know how to code. I went to business school undergrad, and then I went for my MBA afterwards. And I found that just a little bit of learning to code got me tons of credibility, tons of respect from other engineers of saying, oh, you're not just some business guy. You actually understand what we're all about. So it's really good at building a team and building respect. And then at Meetings.io, actually, so the co-founders, as I said, Dennis and Aaron, they're brilliant, brilliant guys, brilliant engineers, and Dennis was both engineering and doing design. He was a great designer. And I wanted to have them focused as much as possible on building the really hard video technology. So there were times where I said, okay, we need to fix part of our website in terms of how we're marketing and communicating, just some of the basic front-end web stuff. And I said, you guys, you keep working on the really hard back end, the really hard video protocols. I'm just going to make a few changes to the code. So that just meant they could focus on the hard stuff, I could focus on the easy coding, and then get right back to building a bigger market or communicating with the users. So again, so many amazing, amazing benefits to learning to code, in addition to it just being really fun. So I highly recommend going out there and learning. It's not nearly as hard as it looks from the outside. I remember being intimidated about learning to code. I think I started and stopped trying to learn to code a couple times because I just didn't have the right resources. And if you get an amazing teacher, amazing online class, then it's easy and it's fun, and it's all about having amazing projects that pull you in. And so I'm happy to talk later about what the best path for learning to code is, but there's some amazing, amazing courses online that are free that you can start at any time, and it's never been easier or better. Okay, I'm going to end my rant now on learning to code, and now we'll talk about, I think, different types of business models. Sorry, I guess, did that answer the question? Was that good on the size of the loops? Okay, cool. Any other questions before I go on? Yes.
The lean canvas has a very peculiar structure. Some boxes are bigger than the other. Is there any reason behind that? Or?
Huh. The question is there any reason for why some of these boxes are bigger than others? I don't think so. I mean, I think it's just aesthetically pleasing. I recommend looking through the guide online. There might be an answer to it. I'm not going to make one up. I think these are all really important, but they're important at different times of your company's life cycle. I think they're all sort of intentionally small so that you don't go too crazy, because they're supposed to be like quick one-liners or two-liners about each one. And key metrics is small because, again, it's just like, what are the one or two key stats? You don't want a whole list of things that you're tracking, because then you're not going to pay enough attention to any one of them. All right, types of business models. So the first one I'll just call out here, which is services. This is very, very traditional of just going and playing the role of consultant or doing back office work. Some of the biggest companies that have been built started as service companies. I mean, you have like companies like Infosys that are services. I don't think services are super exciting for startups. They don't scale nearly as well. They usually scale at a rate that's how many employees you have, and they're not valued from a market cap size very highly. And my general thought, and my guess is most of you will arrive at this too, like, if you're with startups, the beauty is that you build something once, maybe build something over a weekend, and without putting in too much more effort on the technology side or building out your team, it could end up scaling to millions of users. And you miss out on all of that if you're trying to build an old school services company. So I'm calling it out here. It's a type of business model. It's not an exciting one. I strongly, strongly recommend you don't think about it at all. The one thing I will call out, there are sometimes a really good way to start an enterprise based business is to start out as a service, but in a very specific way with everyone on the team sort of understanding what you're trying to do. So specifically, you might go to your first customer and say, let's see, let me come up with a good example for this. So I'm not sure I don't think this is how they started, but I'll throw it out there. Are you all familiar with the company Box? So Box, it's sort of like Dropbox, but for businesses, and they have a lot of tools around how to share files and information within a business. And so when they were starting out, they could have gone to their first potential customer. Let's say they wanted to sell to let's say they wanted a customer in it's Toyota. So maybe they went to Toyota and said, you have lots of documents, and you really should have a better way of sharing documents amongst each other. Contract us out as a consultant to build this for you. And that's a very services approach. But in the contracts, they could have written, once we build it, we can then take it and sell it to other companies also. And so that's a great way of, one, you get your money up front from the company you're building, from whom you're building it, so you don't have to necessarily raise venture capital. And two, you're getting paid to learn. And anytime you can get paid to learn is really, really nice. So you're working closely, you're building something where you already know there's one customer, and ideally there's a really tight feedback loop as you're presenting them better and better designs of that feature so that you know that what you're building is actually useful. Slow down. Thank you. I'll slow down. So again, that type of thing can be a really good start, but you then need to, as soon as you have the first one out there, say, okay, how do we turn this into something that any company can come to our website and start using or download or reach out to us in some way? And that the expectations of everyone up front, everyone from your investors to your early employees, is yes, we're acting as a services company just at the very beginning, but that's going to change quickly. So anyway, that's all I'll say about services for now. Another very common business model is about selling something to users. This could be selling something one-off. It could be something freemium. Do you all know the term freemium? Hands up if you know freemium. Okay. Freemium refers to that most of your customers are not paying. They're just free, using the service for free, but that some segment of your customers are paying for it, and they're usually getting extra features, functionality, storage space, something along those lines. SaaS is software as a service. That's usually where a company is paying for some sort of product, but it's not something they download. It's something that just lives in the browser, and they're probably paying a certain dollar amount per month, so maybe $15 a month. And then in-app purchases are for mobile apps. Anyway, these are all just sell something to users as a broad business model. Once you have product market fit, the key areas you want to focus on are the costs and the revenues, and making sure that revenues are greater than costs, if you want to take this approach. Also metrics, and so I'll give a quick shout out now to tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm giving a talk on a lot of different toolkits, tools, and other like very specific models you can use when thinking about customers and understanding your customers and your business. And so I'll be calling out some of these here. So the bottom metrics here, customer acquisition cost, which is CAC, and customer lifetime value, CLTV, are metrics. So customer acquisition cost is how much does it cost you to get a new user, and customer lifetime value is how much money will you make from that user over the time that they're your customer. And so knowing those two numbers and making sure that the latter number is bigger than the former number ends up being really important when you're selling something to users. There's also cohort analysis, which looks at different segments of users or different users based on when they come in, and seeing what their behavior is like. Those are two good tools that I'll go into tomorrow, or you can look up online. So anyway, so a very traditional business model is just selling something to users. And again, as you're building up the canvas, cost structure and revenue streams become important here. But that's, of course, once you have product market fit. Another thing you can do is sell your users. So what I mean by that is have a product that is free for your users to use, but that while your users are on the platform, they're creating lots of content or lots of information, lots of data that then you can turn around and sell to someone who's interesting. So it could be that you're selling their attention, and that's just advertising. So Google, for example, or Facebook in that case. You can sell your data. So one good example of that is Twitter. One of the ways that Twitter makes a lot of money is by selling information about how all of their millions or billions now, how many users they have, what they're actually doing and how they're acting. And so an interesting example of a company that might want to buy that data is a hedge fund that says, let's see what stocks people are talking about in advance, and then we'll end up making bets in the stock market based on where conversations are happening. So if you're able to amass a lot of data, then you might be able to sell just access to that data. And finally, there's about selling access to your customers. So one company that's done a great job there is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has become the premier place to go to have your professional profile. And they make a lot of money by selling, there are a few different ways, but they sell a lot of different services to recruiters to be able to sift through information and access people on the platform. So again, so the key things to pay attention to in all these cases, pre-product market fit, you still need to build something that people love in terms of getting the customers on there in the first place. Because you can have the best model about how you're going to make money off it, but unless your initial customers, your initial users really love it, you're going to run into trouble. And then you also have to keep in mind the people who are actually going to pay for it, what are they interested in? And let's make sure there's a way of, so if it's advertising, let's make sure there's a way of actually creating places to put ads or if it's about selling the data, it's about making sure you're tracking the right data in an accessible way. Or if you're selling access, again, that there's a pathway of actually connecting your two groups of customers together. Your customers who are your casual consumers or users, and your customers who are businesses paying for information. As far as key metrics go, maybe you want to be focused on daily active users. So DAU, MAU is daily active users and monthly active users. And so that, and especially that ratio is a good way of looking at how engaged users are. So again, if LinkedIn wasn't paying attention to how many people were coming to the site and suddenly people had created profiles and were never coming back, that would be a lot less valuable to sell to recruiters. And again, cohort analysis is good here. Okay, so another type of business model is a marketplace. And this is another case where you have multiple stakeholders, multiple sets of users. So in a traditional, very clean marketplace, very simple marketplace, you probably have your buyers and your sellers. So, and if you're talking about, say, eBay or even Amazon, you have the people who are listing products on there and the people that are coming to buy. And again, so building two-sided marketplaces are really hard because you have to not only really delight and amaze one group of users, you have to do two groups of users. And that's hard. And what's even harder is you have even more complicated network effects here, because the buyers aren't going to list their product if there aren't any sellers, and the buyers aren't going to come if there aren't any good products, and the sellers aren't going to list anything if they don't think there are going to be buyers there. So this becomes really, really tough. And so you rarely see a successful marketplace just starting from nothing and saying, hey buyers, hey sellers, just come here and list. So one of the common hacks at the beginning of if you're building a marketplace is called hacking one side. So in this case, it could be rounding up all of the buyers that you already have access to in some other way and putting them on the site and then saying, hey suppliers, look, we already have millions of people ready to buy. Or more common is usually the reverse, going to a bunch of possible sellers and saying, hey, we have this new platform. We might not have any buyers yet, but can you just email your information? We'll actually enter everything ourselves so that you don't actually have to create accounts for you. We'll just build it, and then you'll be okay. And so it's like, normally you don't want to be creating individual accounts, doing things manually for any kinds of users because it doesn't scale as well. But in the beginning, actually let me take a step back. So in the beginning you want to do things that don't scale because you're just trying to get any interesting activity and any learnings there in the first place. And again, so things that you do in the beginning that don't scale could be going out and talking with every single user. And of course, you're not going to do that when you have thousands or millions of users, but early on, that's what you need to do to make sure you're getting the best information. So again, like when you're trying to jumpstart a marketplace, do things that don't scale, manually enter in different information, and that's sort of how you go about hacking one side. There's a really good quote. I was talking to somebody about this, and they said, what you really want to be doing is hacking both sides, because if you're not using every little trick in the book to try and get as much activity as possible, then you're leaving yourself at risk for it failing flat for non-interesting reasons. You could have a really good idea and a really good product that you're just not able to get above the threshold where there are enough buyers and sellers. So a metric here I'll throw out that might be an interesting key metric is what are your sales for every customer? How much sales are happening per user on the platform? That could be pure number of sales, number of times per month they're buying, or total dollar amount. And unique value proposition is also really important here because there are usually a lot of different marketplaces out there. They're probably getting whatever they're buying from some other channel, and you have to have a convincing way of why your channel is better. I'll give one example right now of a cool way a company hacked the supply side. So Airbnb, is everyone here familiar with Airbnb? Show of hands. Pretty much, yeah. So Airbnb went around when they were just starting on Craigslist. And is there Craigslist in Malaysia? Are you familiar with Craigslist? Lots of, okay. So they went on Craigslist. They took all of the listings that people were saying of like renting out their apartment and just put it on Airbnb. I don't think they even asked the people on Craigslist. But suddenly, if you come to Airbnb's website, you saw all these postings, and as a potential buyer, or in this case, somebody who's going to rent an apartment or stay at an apartment, it's a really good experience. All right, so that's marketplaces. And then platforms. Platforms are also really hard to do. Slow down. Thank you. So platforms, I think that's the final of the high-level business models we're going to talk about now. Platforms are very varied out there. So right now, Facebook and Twitter are both platforms where there are lots of other apps and companies built on top of it. iOS and Android are also examples of platforms. Being a platform is a great place to be because usually you have sometimes three-way network effects going in. You have developers who are developing on the platform because you have lots of customers. You have customers loving it because there are other customers out there, and lots of apps because there are lots of developers. And then there might be lots of advertisers coming in also, and lots of other companies. It's just all these great feedback loops. However, it's really hard to get a platform started in the first place, just because you have so many different groups to please. So one thing that is pretty much always true, if you want to build a platform, you have to build the first app on it yourself. So with Apple and iOS, when they launched iOS, the iPhone was out for at least a year, maybe two, before they even had an app store, and they built tons of great functionality in, so that even if there were no other apps ever, people would still like those. Likewise, with Facebook, there's tons of great features and functionality before anyone can even develop anything like that. So again, if you want to build a platform, you probably have to build the first app yourself. And so it's good to have the back of the line, hey, we can run your platform. We want to say, hey, we think we built something that has lots of value, even before there are any other developers. And so unfair advantage is kind of really here because you need to really understand what the first killer app is, and you need to be really good at creating great place for developers to come and build apps. I'll give you a couple other examples that are not less traditional, like high-level abstract business models, but are kind of extreme we're thinking about. So there's a recurring theme often around shrinking market saying, so I'll give you an example from the US. There's an online gaming market. There used to be a handful of big companies that had somewhat funky, hard-to-use sites, and they were doing really well, they were charging a lot of money. And then there's a company called Computer that came along and said, we're going to make it free. We're going to say anyone can come on and use our online gaming product for free, and what we're going to do is turn a market that is really big into one that's maybe half the size or a quarter the size overall in terms of total profit, but we're going to own like 50% of that. And if they come along and try to do the more traditional thing and charge a lot of money, they probably would have a hard time getting lots of users because they made it free. They did really, really well. They got tons of users, and ultimately they might have grown market to figure out other different ways to monetize. But at least the first they shrunk the market, but took over a large piece of it. So when you're shrinking markets, again, the most crucial thing is probably the combination of the costs and revenues, because unless you have some unique insight as to how you're going to get revenue in a lower cost structure, you might run into the same problems or have the same incentives that the big players have. So I'm not quite sure how cost structures are working, but my guess is that they're using a completely different technology stack, which allow them to have lower overall costs than their competitors. And then on the revenue side, they figured out clever ways to make the revenue work that way. People familiar with the term collaborative consumption? Collaborative consumption also a term that gets thrown around is like a sharing economy, and it's anytime you're taking usually consumers that have items or assets that aren't being used all the time, and spread them out among more assets to users. So Airbnb allows, if you have a spare guest room or you have a spare apartment, to rent that out. In the US, there are also lots of companies about saying, oh, I'm only using my car one day, and why am I letting you use my car for other days? And we're seeing these collaborative consumption type starts happening with any kind of physical good, but also a lot of other people's time. So saying, hey, I actually have a few free hours. This is interesting. I can do, interesting work I can do at that time. And so this has become a pretty popular theme lately. So understanding the cost structure becomes really important. Also, in the guise of does it make sense for my users? So thinking about your users as micro businesses, even though most of them are just everyday consumers, they don't think of themselves as businesses, and saying, okay, how much is it going to cost them to participate, and how much money are they going to get, and does that end up working out? And then, of course, channels become really important here too, especially if you're trying to push forward some sort of new behavior. Because usually when you talk about the sharing economy, it's things that at first people. So with Airbnb, for a long time, people had a sense of like, wait, you're going to let strangers into your apartment? How's that going to work? And then, of course, it ended up working out fine. But then you have to figure out what channels are going to get you those early users who can prove out the model. Okay, that brings to a close the first half, which is all about business models. And next up, we'll be talking about specific revenue streams. Are there any questions on business models? All right, no questions right now. Am I slowed down enough? Is my talking okay? Are people understanding me? Mostly good? All right. Keep waving your hands if I'm talking too fast. So, again, I'll bring up services again. So revenue stream with services can either be a per engagement, per project kind of thing. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but sometimes you get interesting models that occur where you're giving away your product, so you might be doing a freemium type thing, and so the product is free, but if you want support, then you charge for the support. And this is sort of in a gap between the more traditional product startups and a services company. But there are companies that have been built that have been pretty powerful based on this. So you usually see this in the open source community, where you have, so for example, MySQL is a very popular database. It was created by a company and then open source, just given away. But they became the place to go to if you want it. If you're a big company and you want to make sure it's implemented the right way, you pay MySQL to help you implement it. So you can do that as a service company. Hosting versus on-prem. On-prem is short for on-premise. Is a term used by enterprise companies. So Jive, who bought Meetings.io, they had this really intricate collaboration tool that at first was actually installed on-premise, which means there are physical servers in the company, which as someone who's entered the tech scene in like the in the mid to late 2000s, blows my mind that like, wait, it's not just all in some giant data center at an Amazon? That's mind-boggling. You mean like there are companies that actually still keep servers in the basement? But for security reasons and for legal reasons, regulatory reasons, there are a lot of companies that need to do that. And so you can end up charging not just for your product, but also for the maintenance of the on-premise software. Or you can end up charging, hosting is somewhere in between just storing it in the cloud and putting it in a box on-premise, which means, so the way hosting works is I might, as a company, have my own data center that all my customers end up having their own server in the data center. It's not all on one server. Anyway, just to call out, those are some specific revenue streams that you can start playing with when you're talking about services. I mean, the latter part is true of many enterprise companies in general. Okay, one-off sales is another just clear way of getting revenue. You're just charging for each purchase. I don't think it makes too much sense to go in depth on that one. So let me preface a bit. So this section, I'm just going to be running through a bunch of different revenue models. So keep in mind, again, like once you think you have product market fit and you're trying to figure out the best way of getting your customers to pay you, these are all things to have in your back pocket that you might want to test, might want to experiment with. So pay what you want is a model that's been used a bunch recently. The image I have up here is from a company called Humble Bundle, which sells mostly indie games online and usually sells 6 different games. And sometimes they're more established, but older games. We'll sell 6 games at once, and you choose how much you want to pay. You can pay as little as $1, or you can pay $50 or more. And depending on how much you pay, sometimes there's like a little threshold. If you pay over a certain amount, you get a bonus game. But most of the time, you just pay what you want, and then you can actually adjust how much goes to the developers, how much goes to charity. So this is an interesting model. Pay what you want is really cool because if you've built up a very loyal following amongst an audience, they usually want to pay you. They want to reward you for doing a great job, and in doing so, hopefully get you to build more amazing things. Going back, some of the earliest pay what you want experiments were musicians who released their album for free and told their listeners, hey, if you want to send us some money, we'd really appreciate it. What all this is predicated on is building that amazing relationship with your audience. And that's a broader truism, is that regardless of anything else, if you build an amazing relationship with an audience, you are empowered to go a lot farther and have a lot more success. They will provide you better feedback as you're building the initial product. They will tell their friends and provide a much lower customer acquisition cost because they're doing it for you. They're telling their friends for free. So again, starting with building a great audience connection is really helpful. Advertising and sponsorship is another clear revenue channel. And one of the key tensions here is always how much advertising are your users going to be comfortable with, and what forms can you embed advertising in that aren't super obnoxious or that users pay attention to. One of my friends came up with a paper called Peak Advertising, basically saying, have we hit the most advertising online that people are going to put up with and pay attention to? And he pointed to things such as the fact that there's studies that people aren't looking at advertisements as much on Google and on Facebook. They kind of just avoid it. Or some people even use browser plugins that completely block the ads, so they don't even see them. It's impossible for them to see them. And so you can think about advertising and sponsorship, but you want to make sure it's appropriate, and you want to make sure that it's relevant to your users if you're going to be putting it in there. Subscriptions are another clear revenue stream. So up on the left, I think this is for a company called Patreon, another US-based startup that is all about allowing audiences to connect with content creators they love. So the founder of this site created really awesome music videos online and really cool digital music. And so through this platform, it allows users to say, okay, every time you come out with a new video or a new song, I'm happy to just automatically pay you a couple dollars, or really however much they want. And because it's a subscription based, people who are on this platform can now say, oh, if I want to make sure I earn enough money to cover rent this month, I'll just create a few new songs or videos or whatever. In this case, I think they're raising for comics. And so it becomes a really powerful way from the content creator side to know how they can make a living off of what they're creating. And as a platform, it's really great because once people have given their credit card over, it's that much easier to get them to continue to spend money. Sometimes the biggest obstacle when you're looking at the flow of users through your site is getting them to actually enter their credit card info. And so subscriptions are nice because they just keep going and going, and you don't have to fight every time to get them to pull out the credit card. Let's see. Other examples of subscriptions. So I've Reddit up in the top right corner, where you can, they try and get people to buy Reddit Gold, which is like it doesn't really do much, but it's sort of a premium status symbol. And you can also do that on a subscription basis. And these are also sort of like examples of if you can get that amazing relationship between you and your audience, you and your customers and fans, lots of great stuff will happen. It becomes easier to get them to help to support you. Another good example of how to implement revenue streams is a tiered service. This is an example from a really cool developer tool called Firebase. And it allows you to do distributed real-time backend. Basically allows you to not have a backend or not have a backend database or sometimes a backend at all on your website. And anyway, they have a lot of different tiers. And this is an example of both tiered service and freemium. So if you're just a developer hacking on some fun projects, or even if you're starting your company and you don't have any customers yet, there's a free plan. And that gives you only a certain amount of storage and a certain number of connections at the same time. But then as things go up and up, you have more tiers that have $49 a month, $149 a month, $500 a month. And they all have different slices here. And so this becomes a really nice way of having slightly different products for different customer segments and so the balance here is always how many different tiers do you have, how do you charge appropriately, and a lot of that comes from really understanding what are your customer segments, how do they value things. In this case, there's a long list of things that sort of change on each one. Sometimes you see much more simple. So if you have five people in your company using the service, it'll cost you this much. Between 5 and 50 this much, and above this other rate. So again, the trick here is keeping it simple, but also differentiating between your different groups. Freemium we talked about earlier. Evernote is a good company that's done a lot of freemium work where they have certain users that really love their power features, really love the extra, I'm trying to remember what their main power features are. A lot of collaboration, I think, so if you're using Evernote with other people. So again, if you build an amazing product that people love, there's usually a distribution of users who just use like a small handful of the features, and users who use all the features and use it all the time. And you can choose which features are included in the free version versus the premium version and charge accordingly. So again, one of the key things here is really understanding your customer segments and their behaviors and figuring out who's willing to pay and what features matter most to them, and then putting that out in the paid version. Affiliate sales is another example. Affiliate sales means that you are helping to sell somebody else's product and you're getting a commission on it. So there are a lot of sites that have come up that help you, say, browse through different products, choose the right product, and then they might kick you over to Amazon, and then kick the customer over to Amazon once they're ready to purchase. And so this might be a way of starting up when, if you want to build a marketplace or build a broader ecosystem. In the beginning, you might start out just doing something affiliate so that you don't have to deal with inventory management yourself or something along those lines. Selling data, we talked about this under business models. Here you usually charge for access to the whole stream or access. Here, maybe you might be able to segment the market by charging for, truly real-time access versus access that's updated every day. Or you might be able to charge based on how big a data set you sell. You can sell, so access, so we talked about this before with LinkedIn. So here are 2 different subscriptions. So there's like annual and monthly for LinkedIn, and this is the prompt for recruiters. So in this case, they're saying, hey, recruiters, you can engage with all these workers on LinkedIn and see all their profiles and reach out to them. In-app purchases, another clear revenue stream. This is an example of an app I really love that does text to speech. So I used to read tons of ebooks. Now I have the ebooks read to me just automatically. You put in any text file, any EPUB, and it just reads aloud. And so anyway, the beginning app is not free, but it's fairly inexpensive. And then you could purchase different voices if you want better voices. So in-app purchases is always nice. And again, you want to know and be able to charge accordingly based on different customer segments and their needs. Selling based on transactions is always a common model if you're able to get lots of volume, and usually this is a later stage of what it looks like as either a marketplace or as infrastructure. So Amazon, in this case, is getting a little bit of cut of every transaction that takes place on their platform, likewise eBay. And then what's nice about these types of models is if you're at a certain scale where they're viable, there's really good incentive alignment between you and between your users and your sellers, because anything you can do that can help your sellers sell more, you're also benefiting because you're taking a little bit of each transaction. You're getting a few cents on the dollar. And then let's see, what's the example down here? I think this is Stripe. Stripe is a payments company that makes it really easy for anyone who's creating a startup to put simple payments for the customer to pay them. So it used to be that you'd end up spending weeks or months making sure that your customers were able to pay you online, and Stripe and companies like them make it so you just drop in, cut and paste some code, and now you have payments. And the way they make their money, again, is it's a tiny sliver of every transaction. And so again, great infrastructure play, solving a problem that they knew existed because they had struggled with building the financial stuff for previous startups. And now they solved the problem, made it really easy, and can take a tiny slice of many transactions. So that's the main overview of revenues and business models. I guess to summarize again, something like the biggest thoughts, the biggest takeaways. One is it's not about having the perfect model out there. It's having a lot of your guesses mapped out so that everyone's on the same page, and you can start rigorously testing them and running really fast and testing and testing and testing. And you want to be doing that before you have product market fit, when you just have a hunch of what's really going to amaze people. But then you also want to be doing it once you've already built it about, well, what's the best way to get new users? And then you want to keep going as you scale. You want to have hypotheses around, well, what's the best way to create the best company culture? What's the best way to create the best partnerships, to get the best press? Always iterating, always experimenting, and always being open to always coming at it from a point of view of, I don't know. Always coming at it from a point of view of, this is a new space. We're doing something new, and I don't have to have all the right answers. Because I can experiment, and I can experiment with different types of revenue, and I can experiment with different whole business models, different ways of communicating the benefits to users. So always coming at it from that curious, open point of view. Anyway, so I would love to hear questions from you all.
Share a real case scenario, how do you pivot as you compare to the key metrics and things like that?
Sorry, comparing key metrics to?
How can you show a real example how some of the company pivot real fast during the first part of their product life cycle, something like that? Or do they compare with the key metrics?
How to get from the initial assumptions to the key metrics?
No.
Sorry.
How they pivot the right.
Sure. So the question is, a good real-life example of a pivot in action based on the metrics. Let me think about that for a second.
So in the life cycle of a startup,
Yeah.
in the life cycle of a startup, how probable would it be that you would actually have multiple or changing revenue streams?
Sure. So the question, life cycle of a product, how often do you have multiple or changing revenue streams? I think it's very, very common that early on you think you're going to make money one way, or maybe you even do make money one way, and later on you find a better, more scalable solution. So the example I gave when we were talking about starting as a services company and then switching to a software as a service sort of platform is a great instance of, the way you make money at first is just one customer paying you as a consultant, and later on they're paying you as a subscription for an established product. So that's really common. At Meetings.io, we were looking at things from the point of view. So Meetings.io, we started as video chat. We had a hypothesis about becoming an expert consulting marketplace through video. And so we knew that early on, if we were to get revenue at all, it might be from in a freemium way of people paying for extra features for the video chat. But down the road, it was all going to be a transaction based off of people consulting with experts over video chat. So I think those kind of pivots are very common. You also see things such as starting off as premium and then adding a freemium end of it also. And usually when freemium is implemented, you see it implemented with advertising. So one of the things, the benefits of becoming a paid member is getting rid of advertising. That's a common thing that's usually experimented with, but added later. Next question.
For Meeting.io, you mentioned that revenue wasn't a key metric. Does that mean it just wasn't a prioritized key metric, or completely not in the picture and later on?
Sure, completely. So at Meetings.io, we were not thinking about revenue as a metric at all early on. And so Meetings.io is kind of a weird example in general because we sold before we had earned a single dollar in revenue. But the goal was test out the product, make sure that people are using the video chat well. So actually, this might be an interesting illustration of how we laid out our product roadmap to de-risk and validate every step of the way, and to do so in as small steps as possible so we can keep getting feedback. So step one, we launched where all you could do is video chat and no other no features around that. Then we got some feedback that and one other thing. So one of the ways we were able to do it so inexpensively on our end was by using peer-to-peer protocols over Adobe Flash, which prior to that everyone had. Skype was able to do it, but they didn't work in the browser, and then everyone else had hosted instances. So there were companies like GoToMeeting and WebEx that had solid video chat geared toward big companies, but they were expensive to run and expensive for customers to use. So that's why we really wanted to make sure that peer-to-peer stuff worked well. What we found is that users in certain circumstances were having a lot of trouble using it because the peer-to-peer wouldn't work because of the router or because they were behind a corporate firewall. So we launched a product that was broken for some percentage of users at first, and that was okay because we were able to get great feedback from the people for whom the product worked, and we then were able to evaluate, okay, the users for which it's not working, do we want to spend the extra time tweaking for them or not? We ended up, after a few months, putting in some features that made it so that we could reach many more users, and we added in the features that we thought would really make the difference, like screen share. The next steps on our roadmap, we created a profile page so that so I had a glossy page that had information about me and a one-click button to video chat with me. And that was the first step on our way. We said, okay, if we can get experts to create a profile page, then we can start testing people's ability to engage with experts online and willingness to engage with experts online before we even have payments or a marketplace or anything else. And so at that stage, so I'll use this actually to call out a few different other concepts I talked about in the presentation. We didn't know who our initial set of users were going to be. We didn't want to start by saying, oh, it's going to be all experts, because we thought that would be a recipe for a disaster, to have a very bland, general tool that wasn't amazing for anyone. So some of the hypotheses we had were a way for parents to talk with parenting and childhood experts to get advice, or engineers to talk with top coders and get advice, or even one we were thinking about was cosmetologists, people who were really good at fashion and makeup, to consult with them to say, oh, how should I put on my makeup? And so these were very different groups. And so what we did was we went around and started talking with people, both experts and customers in all of these groups, and getting as much feedback as possible. And our goal was to start actually testing, are people willing to pay to talk to these users? And we didn't want to already start building out all the financial infrastructure, and we didn't want to build out a whole expert marketplace, but we started going to experts who already had some customers and saying, hey, try and use this product with your customers, or try and charge people, just use PayPal or have them send you a check and see if they're willing to behave in this way. And so we started getting feedback there. And then, unfortunately, we weren't able to carry out all of our experiments. Or I shouldn't say unfortunately. We sold the company before we were able to finish experimenting. But the next step would have been creating one vertical marketplace, one marketplace just focused on parents or fashion or engineering. And once we got that part to work, then we would say, okay, let's create a generalized platform for all experts everywhere. But again, we wanted to chunk it down to small bits so that we could always be learning and learning. Because it could have been that we learned most experts aren't willing to engage in online video chat, or only this subset over here is, or oh, they are, but only with these other special caveats. And then we would have saved ourselves tons of time in that way by learning that before we built anything else.
It's almost a follow-on question to that, where you're combining the services with the subscription. VCs, of course, don't want to see much of a services for scalability issues, but not everybody will get a VC, maybe soon enough, so you have to bootstrap to some time or whatever. So how do you balance how much you should service and how much you should focus on the subscription? It could be an image of a company also, if you do too much services, maybe people look at you as a services company. I want to be a subscription provider, but I need money also to survive. So,
yeah.
So how do you balance this whole thing?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So the question is balancing between being a services company and being a subscription company, especially in light of the fact that fundraising is hard and cash is more important than anything else. I'd say a few things. One, you want to be a services company. If you're taking that approach, you want to be a services company until you stop learning as much. So you think about it in terms of diminishing returns. So maybe you want to be a services company for the first few companies, for the first few customers, because you keep learning something new from each customer. But there's going to be a certain point where the learning trails off, and that might be the times to switch over and become a subscription company. But that's all predicated on the fact that you can actually support yourself, that you have enough cash in the bank to last until you're profitable. So a lot of my advice today, a lot of what I've talked about, sort of has the understanding that you're trying to do the traditional raise money from angel investors, VCs, from grants from the government, and that you have some time to work with. But ultimately, none of that matters if you're going to run out of money and have to go take a real job. So being pragmatic about, I know we want to switch to subscription, but we just need a couple more months of money right now. I mean, there are definitely lots of companies out there in Silicon Valley that on the side will keep doing consulting gigs early on just to make sure they have enough money that they don't have to take an extra round of investment. So it's always a tough call. If you have the money, the danger of, so there's a really interesting danger or tension that I'll call out right now, it's a trap that is possible to fall into, is that the money from the consulting and the services might be so good that you're tempted never to switch over to services, never to switch to subscription. And if you're able to make the switch because you have the cash in the bank, that's when you're going to really start learning about how are the subscription customers different. What features do I need to maybe add or remove to make the perfect product for the subscription? Because if you just keep doing services, there's always going to be pressure to add on features that only matter to that one customer. You have a question?
I really understand your point around marketplace solutions. It's a nightmare. It's really tough. So I wouldn't recommend anyone do it. But having said that, we are already in it. And the question that we are wondering is, like, when you're trying to pivot between one business model and the next, what you're trying to do is really trade off between scalability/volume, how quickly you can grow, as well as margin, which is then a factor of cost and the price that you can charge. Upfront, when you're considering different things, there are a lot of assumptions you make that you cannot test until you're 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or even 2 months down the line. So how do you really do projections on which one you should pivot to? Any tips?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you make projections as to where you should pivot to and how you can pivot, especially when you've already built something that's out there that you're maintaining? And so my advice is always, can you carry out little experiments? But let me take a step back, is to try and figure out the number from multiple different directions. So one way to do so might be carving out a little experiment, and it could be taking your existing company, your existing brand, and changing the name of it or creating a little sub thing that you put off to the side, and so that you're not gambling the entire company at once. You're doing a little experiment that if it takes off, then you switch everything over to it. It could be looking at other competitors out there. So ideally, you're moving into a space where nobody's doing exactly what you're doing, because that's a very hard place to play. But it could be that your customers are behaving in similar activity on another platform, and they're spending a certain amount of money per month. And so you can sort of reason, okay, if they're spending this amount of money per month on that platform, it might also work on your platform. Or from a cost structure point of view, saying, well, our technology looks like this. Let's find some other people who aren't competitors but have a similar looking technology structure and talk to them and see how does their cost structure change in relation to the business model. And so doing a bit of that research up front, especially finding analogous companies, similar companies that you can say, okay, maybe we have the cost structure of this company and the revenue of this company, so our margins are going to end up looking like this when we combine them. That helps de-risk it a bit. And when you combine that with doing smaller experiments rather than saying, okay, we're just going to change the entire company over, it becomes a much safer bet. More questions? Whatever. Do you have a question? Nope, we're here. Oh, I see. Hey.
Okay, hi, I'm Jay. I would like to ask, can you explain more on how actually the revenue streams for sell data and sell access works?
So the revenue streams for selling data and
Yes.
access? So the question is going back to revenue streams around data and access. And so there are a lot of different ways to implement it, and it depends on exactly what your data and access look like. When you're talking about the data, it might be access to all data about your customers, just the raw information that's sitting in your database, usually anonymized in a way that protects some of your customers' privacy. It could be about selling some of the aggregate data or insights. It could be that you have unique data that nobody in the world does about your customers, and you can sell some of that to investors. Again, so the hedge fund example, it could be the people talking about different brands and how excited they are about different brands might be an indication of where the stock is going to go. And so you don't need to give them every tweet that's been made about the brand, but just the directional numbers. So a deal might be made that is access to the data, what's called the fire hose, all of the data coming out. And so that might be, we're going to charge you, $100,000 a month for access to the whole fire hose. Or it might be, we're going to compile reports every month on the high-level things, and we're just going to charge $5,000 for the report if you want to buy the report, and you don't need a subscription. So those are two sort of different approaches for data. And then for access, so LinkedIn has the ability to send messages to people that you're not already friends with or contacts with, and so I think they charge per message. Or with the subscription, the rate goes down, or I think they have a tier where you have unlimited messages to send out. So you can meter it out based on the messages, and that's a way of selling the access. Does that help? Is that a good answer? All right, cool. Other questions?
My question is more on.
Yeah. I can always repeat the question if we don't use the microphones.
Hi. My question is more on the pricing. So how do you experiment with the pricing? Because when you just start up and you have a new product, even just a small marginal change, the change of value, how do you experiment with it? How do you allow how many times you can adjust the price? Maybe to consumer it's easy, but it's quite tricky when you deal with B2B kind of business, because when you change the price, people will see that why are you changing the price up and down?
Yeah. So the question is, how do you figure out pricing, and how do you experiment with pricing? And that is a topic for much bigger, deeper talks in general. I'll try and answer a little bit of it now, but there is a whole science to how you figure out pricing. Early on, you can afford to experiment a lot. You can just say, today the pricing is going to be $5 a month. Tomorrow it's going to be, and then the next day you just change it to $10 a month. People who have apps in the App Store tend to do this a lot. And so they just keep, every day they'll just sort of change the price and see how that affects demand. Other ways of experimenting with price involve looking for analogous services. So if you're selling B2B, saying, okay, I have a collaboration tool for big companies. Let me look at other collaboration tools for big companies and see how much is being spent. But usually you need to go a little bit deeper than how much are they advertising on their site, because in the US at least, many of the bigger deals, like if you're selling something for a company that's going to have 100 people using it, they're not going to pay what's listed on the website. They're going to negotiate some discount. They're going to expect some discount. So again, you find the analogy, but make sure that the company you're comparing it to, that it is what you think it is. And something I found in the U.S., and my guess is it's true here, because what I've found is that most startup communities all around the world are sort of the same in a lot of their spirit, is that even if you're not directly competing with them, they're going to help you and say, oh, well, we found. So let's say you're doing B2B and you're selling to giant consumer goods companies, product companies. And so you might go to somebody who's selling a completely different tool to those same companies and just talk with their sales team or talk with their founders and say, how did you figure out your pricing and how much did you think they could pay? So that ends up being a really good strategy. Whenever you can tap the ecosystem, that becomes really valuable. And the ecosystem in the US, the culture is such that everyone wants to help everyone else out, because they knew when they were starting out they benefited so much from the advice of other existing founders and investors. And my guess is that there's just something core to being an entrepreneur and building something new and knowing how tough that is, but how amazing the experience can be, that you want to help other people out. So not hesitating to reach out when you have these interesting problems, and to people who have been in similar situations, saying, how did you do that also? So definitely, we have time for some more questions, I think, but I'll also throw up a slide. Hey, where'd that go? Hold on. I thought I had an extra. That's not it. Oh, maybe not. For some reason, it didn't save. So other questions, so keep asking about revenue and business models, but if you want to ask me also about learning to code or the process of selling a company, selling a startup, I'm happy to talk about that as well. Sure. Oh, yeah. Which part of it? The second part. The sale. Okay. Yeah. So happy to talk about the experience. I'll give you the abridged version now, and I'm happy to answer more questions later. So Meetings.io officially launched in April 2012. By mid-summer, we had probably between 100 and 200,000 users, and we started getting some acquisition interest because we'd gotten a lot of good press. That was one of our strategies for getting users early on, was we had great relationships with reporters, and we had timed out every few weeks a new feature to launch or a new milestone we had hit that press could write about. So 1 week we'd say, oh, we just hit 100,000 users and we added screen sharing, and so we'd get press from TechCrunch. And then the next week we'd say, and then like 2 weeks later we'd say, oh, we just hit 150,000 users and we added new features around profile pages, and then VentureBeat would write a story. And so this press started generating interest from potential acquirers. And for us, it took the form of like, oh, we want to have a partnership talk with you, that as soon as we were talking with them about partnerships, it became clear they just want to buy us. And so in general, when you think about do you want to sell your company, there are only a few reasons why you might want to sell. One is that the price is just ridiculously good. So that if you think your current company is currently worth, I don't know, 5 million and they're offering you 20 million, it's pretty hard to say no to that, especially if you have investors. You have a responsibility to your investors to do the right thing financially. So that's one reason you might want to sell. Another reason is if the company's about to sort of go under anyway. If you think that, and it might not look that way on the outset, like things might look okay, but if you know we have some users and it looks good on the outside, but they aren't really engaging the way we want, they're disappearing too quickly, we don't think we have product market fit even though we have lots of users, because that happens sometimes. Sometimes companies are able to just pay for tons of users and the users don't stick around, and the press loves them, but they're not real. And so if you're in a situation where you just don't think your current business is sustainable, that might be a good reason to sell, especially because that could be a good return to your investors and you get out before you go bankrupt. The third reason that gets thrown around is sometimes if you're just exhausted. If you as the founder are no longer excited about running it, ready to keep running and going through the adventure of the startup, that might be a reason to sell, even if the company could continue to go on for a while. And that happens because startups are hard and people fall in that bucket too. So with Meetings.io, it was a combination of some of it, but we thought we were going to get a really good offer, and we also, it had been a grind for the founders. The founders had been working really hard for about 4 years, crazy roller coaster of ups and downs of really, really great feedback from users, and then having to shut down different products and services because of legal threat. And so at the end of a 4-year grind, when they thought that they were going to get an offer, and they were going to get a good offer, that sounded great, especially because we were at a point that was still really risky. We didn't have any revenue. We had some really fun hypotheses about how we were going to get revenue, but we weren't there yet. And so with that being said, we said, do we really think we're going to get a good enough offer from this process? And if you come to my talk on Friday, I'm giving a talk on negotiations where I'll reference the whole sale a little bit more in depth and some of the negotiations tactics we used. But we said, okay, we came to a point where we said, okay, we think we're going to get a good enough offer. What I then said to the team was, okay, we then need to go ahead with 100% of our time focused on getting a good offer, because if we split our time between building the amazing product vision that we love and also trying to get a good offer, we're going to end up with mediocre product and mediocre offer. And so we agreed that the best thing to do is to go through the negotiation. We still worked on the product a little bit, but we only worked on the features that we thought would help get us a better terms on the deal. And so then we dedicated a lot of time and energy toward the sale, and that meant first talking to all of our friends and all of our contacts in the startup ecosystem who had recently gone through a sale, either buying a company or selling a company, to learn what they learned, to look out for some of the traps and mistakes that people who were first selling a company make. And then, of course, using our network to get as many introductions as possible. So I think we came up with a list of 40 to 60 companies that might want to buy us. And then we got introductions to maybe half of them pretty quickly. Had good meetings with many of them, good follow-up meetings with a smaller group. And toward the end, it became clear that there were, only like between like 2 and 5 companies that we thought were really good, that we were going to be able to get a good offer in a short period of time. And so we tried to get them all to come in to give us offers around the same time. Ultimately, Jive came in and gave us an offer that was really good, and that we were going to be really happy taking. And at that point, we signed. So without getting too technical, because I also don't know how the process might be different here. So we signed a term sheet that was about 2 pages that had the most important facts of the deal. And then we had about 3 weeks of dealing with our lawyers and their lawyers to come up with a 60 or 70-page document that had all of the fine print about how the deal would work. And that was an exhausting process. Because again, there's little bits of terms here and there in the legal bit can dramatically affect how the deal plays out, even 2 years later, based on the different actions of the company, of Jive, of Meetings.io, of the individual players. So making sure we got all those details right was a lot of working with lawyers and, of course, talking to people in our network who had done deals before and talking about how they had gone wrong so that we could make sure we avoid those pitfalls. So that's sort of a high level of how the sale went. So the question is, most important things in the term sheet. So for us, so the most important thing for most people ends up being what's called the consideration, which is what's the size of the deal. And that usually has 2 components. It has how much cash is paid up front and how much is in stock. And so for us, we were sort of torn between cash and stocks. We did some negotiating about how much was going to be in the balance there. But there are many other important terms. So for us, we were really keen on making sure we weren't liable for patent trolls. Quick show of hands, people, when I say patent troll, do people know what I mean? Okay, so patent trolls, really bad in the US. I'm not sure how bad they are here, but the idea is that there's like a small company that doesn't actually do anything, but they happen to own some patents, and usually very random or obscure patents, and then they decide to sue a random startup because they have like a patent that's so broad that's like, oh, this is a patent on, when you click a button, it switches you to a page in a cool transition, or something very broad that shouldn't have been given out in the first place, but happens to be out there. And so these patent trolls will sue then a lot of different startups, especially when they see these startups have money or they've just gone under an acquisition. And most of the times, the things that wouldn't actually win in court, but it would be so expensive to pay lawyers to fight that it's going to be a headache, and that startups are just happy to settle and just pay money. Basically, it's like extortion almost. And so one of the things we wanted to be careful is we said we did some research. We knew we weren't violating any major patents, but we never knew what crazy patent trolls were out there. So we wanted language in there that protected us in case there was a random patent troll. So that was one of the main things that we wanted to make sure was in there. Other things that were important were based on vesting. So for the individuals involved, how long do we have to stay at Jive in order to get our portion of the payout? Another key thing was how much. So there's a concept called escrow that's used in these deals. So not all of the deal is paid up front. Somewhere between 10 and 20% usually gets held in a bank account for a year or 2 years, just in case there's something is found out after the deal, such as there was theft or there was patent or copyright infringement, and money has to be taken away. It comes out of escrow. And so one of the things we negotiated was how much money is left in escrow and for how long. And because Jive, when they acquired us, had only done a couple acquisitions in the past, we weren't able to get data on how often do they try and actually get all that escrow back, because our fear was that even though we thought we did everything right, Jive would find random excuses to claw back money from the escrow. And because of that, we said, we want to give you as little escrow as possible, but you can keep it for a longer period of time. So if, let's say the average for sales might be 15% escrow and 18 months. We said, let's make it 24 months, but we only 10%. So that was a way of negotiating trying to protect ourselves. Jive was actually wonderful about holding. They had to keep making that escrow, but that's the way we tried to protect ourselves. It's time. So thank you. You've been an awesome audience. I really appreciate your questions, your engagement. You're telling me to slow down. I'll be very more conference. So come find me in the hallways. I'll be on the office hours. Ask me about questions for the startup, and I hope to see you at my panels tomorrow on Toolkits and on